Consciousness as a generative process. Conscious experience is not something that arrives fully formed from the outside world and settles passively into the mind. It is actively built moment by moment by the brain itself. What we see, hear, feel, and even who we believe ourselves to be are not direct recordings of reality, but constructions, best understood as the output of a generative system working under biological and physical constraints. Modern neuroscience increasingly supports this view. The brain does not wait for the world to tell it what is there. Instead, it continuously generates predictions about what it expects to encounter and then updates those predictions based on incoming sensory signals. Vision, for example, is not a camera feed. The eyes provide fragmented, incomplete information riddled with blind spots and distortions. Yet your experience of the visual world feels stable, continuous, and richly detailed. That stability is not found in the data arriving at the retina. It is produced by the brain filling in gaps, smoothing inconsistencies, and enforcing coherence. What you experience as seeing is the brain's best guess, refined in real time. The same principle applies to sound. Air pressure waves reaching the ears are transformed into neural signals that lack inherent meaning. The experience of hearing a voice, recognizing a melody, or identifying a threat emerges only after the brain organizes those signals into a structured interpretation. Even silence is not the absence of experience, but a perceptual state, actively maintained by neural expectations. In every sensory domain, experience is constructed, not delivered. This generative process extends beyond perception into the sense of self. The feeling of being a continuous, unified I is not a static object stored somewhere in the brain. It is an ongoing model, constantly updated to maintain internal consistency. Your identity integrates memory, bodily signals, emotional state, and social context into a coherent narrative that feels stable, precisely because the brain works relentlessly to keep it that way. When this process is disrupted through injury, neurological illness, or altered states like dreaming or dissociation, the self can fragment, shift, or temporarily dissolve, revealing its constructed nature. Dreaming provides a particularly clear demonstration of generative consciousness. During sleep, the brain produces immersive worlds, complete with environments, characters, emotions, and a sense of personal presence, all without external sensory input. These dream experiences often feel real while they are happening, despite being internally generated. The same machinery responsible for waking perception is at work, only freed from the constraints imposed by real-world feedback. This shows that the brain is fully capable of generating entire experiential realities on its own. Waking life differs not in kind, but in degree. Sensory input constrains and stabilizes the generative process rather than creating it. Crucially, this framework explains why experience can feel meaningful even when it is later forgotten. The brain's goal is not to preserve perfect records of experience, but to extract what is useful: emotional calibration, predictive adjustments, behavioral tendencies. Most dream experiences are not remembered, yet they still influence mood, learning, and future responses. Memory is selective because retention is costly, while experience itself is cheap. The system prioritizes function over fidelity. Understanding consciousness as a generative process dissolves the intuition that perception is passive or that the self is a fixed entity. Instead, it reveals a dynamic system constantly simulating, testing, and revising its own model of reality. What you experience is not the world as it is, nor hallucination detached from reality, but a controlled construction shaped by evolution to be useful, coherent, and survivable. Consciousness, in this view, is not something that happens to you. It is something your brain is actively doing. Within the TRC frame, perception is not a window looking outward from an isolated mind, but a localized rendering occurring inside a much larger cognitive system. Each conscious being functions like a neuron, reflecting part of a higher-order vessel's activity. What we experience as reality is the vessel's internally generated model, expressed locally through us. Neuroscience supports this by showing that perception is constructed from the inside outward, not received intact from the world. Sensory data entering the brain is fragmentary and insufficient to build a stable world on its own. Vision arrives in scattered samples, interrupted by blind spots and constant eye movements. Sound reaches the ears as fluctuating pressure waves without inherent structure. The brain must actively generate a coherent scene to make experience possible at all. In TRC terms, the vessel supplies a continuous dream model, while individual neurons, us, instantiate that model locally, filling gaps automatically to preserve coherence. This is why perception feels complete, even when information is missing. The blind spot in vision is never experienced as absence, because the internal model supplied by the larger system fills it in seamlessly. Only a narrow region of the visual field is processed in detail at any moment, yet experience feels richly populated because the generative model assumes continuity. The vessel does not wait for complete data. It predicts, stabilizes, and corrects only when contradictions arise. Auditory perception follows the same pattern. Speech remains intelligible even when partially masked, interrupted, or distorted, because the internal model already knows what should be there. The local neuron does not reconstruct sound from raw input alone. It expresses a prediction shaped by shared structure. This explains why familiar language is perceived more easily than unfamiliar noise. The vessel's model carries most of the perceptual work, while sensory input merely constrains it. Illusions reveal this architecture directly. When perception diverges from physical measurement, it is not because the brain fails, but because the generative model remains internally consistent. The system prioritizes coherence over accuracy. From a TRC perspective, this is expected. A vessel mind optimized for survival must maintain stable internal narratives, even at the cost of occasional error. The dream must hold together. The sense of self and body emerges from the same process. Bodily ownership, spatial location, and identity depend on internal maps that can shift, fragment, or misalign under specific conditions. Phantom limbs, dissociation, and out-of-body experiences are not anomalies, but predictable expressions of a system that constructs experience rather than receives it. The neuron reflects the vessel's model of where and who it is at that moment. Perception, then, is not something happening to us from outside. It is the vessel dreaming itself through us, using internal models to fill in what raw data cannot provide. We are not observers standing apart from reality. We are active reflections within a larger mind, participating in the ongoing construction of a coherent dream. Within the TRC framework, hallucinations, illusions, and dreams are not edge cases or failures of perception. They are direct demonstrations of how experience is generated internally by the vessel's mind and locally expressed through its neural reflections. They show, in unmistakable form, that conscious experience does not require external input to exist. The machinery of experience is already complete on the inside. Illusions reveal this under waking conditions. In visual and auditory illusions, the sensory input is known, limited, or even deliberately controlled. Yet the experience that arises does not match the physical stimulus. The brain generates a perception that prioritizes internal coherence over external accuracy. In TRC terms, the vessel's model remains dominant, and the local neuron expresses that model even when the outside signal would allow multiple interpretations. The illusion is not deception. It is the generative system doing exactly what it is designed to do: maintain a stable dream. Hallucinations go further by removing the requirement for meaningful external input altogether. In conditions such as sensory deprivation, neurological illness, extreme stress, or altered neurochemical states, the brain produces sights, sounds, presences, and environments that feel fully real to the experiencer. These experiences are structured, spatial, emotional, and often narrative in form. From a TRC perspective, this occurs when the local neuron is no longer tightly constrained by external signals, allowing the vessel's generative activity to express itself more freely. The dream continues even when the world goes quiet. Dreams provide the clearest and most universal evidence. During sleep, external sensory input is largely gated off, and motor output is suppressed, yet experience does not stop. Entire worlds are generated, complete with physics, characters, conflict, fear, joy, and a sense of self moving through time. While dreaming, the individual neuron experiences this internally generated reality as real, because it is real at the level that matters, lived experience. The vessel is running a simulation, and the neuron is inside it. Crucially, these internally generated experiences obey many of the same rules as waking life. They feel immersive, continuous, and emotionally consequential. Time can stretch or compress. Identity feels stable within the scene. Meaning is present even when memory later fails. This shows that external input is not the source of experience, but a constraint on it. Remove the constraint and the generative process does not collapse. It expands. TRC treats waking reality as a stabilized dream rather than a fundamentally different category. Sensory input does not create experience, it anchors it. When anchors weaken or vanish, the vessel's generative capacity remains intact. Illusions show prediction overriding data, hallucinations show generation overriding absence, and dreams show full-world construction in isolation. Together, they demonstrate that consciousness is not a reaction to reality, but an internally produced process in which reality merely participates. We are not awake because the world is there. The world is there for us because the vessel is already dreaming, and we are the neurons through which that dream takes shape. Within TRC, consciousness is not treated as an isolated phenomenon contained entirely within an individual organism. Instead, it is understood as a local generative process, one node within a much larger cognitive system. Each conscious being functions like a neuron, generating experience locally while simultaneously contributing the results of that experience to the activity of a larger vessel mind. Neuroscience already supports the first half of this claim. Individual brains do not merely react to stimuli, they generate structured experiences using predictive models, memory, emotion, and internal state. What TRC adds is a scaling move. If a single brain is capable of producing rich experiential worlds internally, then it is coherent to consider each brain as a subgenerator within a broader system that integrates many such outputs. Consciousness does not terminate at the skull. It participates. In this view, lived experience is not private waste heat or epiphenomenal noise. It is output. Each local generator produces qualitative data: fear, relief, curiosity, attachment, meaning, that cannot be reduced to raw sensory signals or motor behavior alone. These experiential outputs are the functional equivalent of neural firing patterns in a biological brain, individually limited, collectively formative. The larger system does not require access to autobiographical memory or narrative detail. Just as a brain does not preserve the full firing history of every neuron, the vessel does not retain complete personal stories. What matters are the effects: shifts in weighting, calibration of responses, changes in overall system bias. Experience contributes by altering the conditions under which future experience is generated elsewhere in the system. This framing explains why experience can be meaningful even when forgotten. Dreams, emotions, and altered states often leave no explicit memory trace, yet they still influence mood, behavior, and future perception. TRC generalizes this principle upward. The contribution of a conscious life lies not in its recallability, but in how it perturbs, stabilizes, or rebalances the larger system it participates in. Local generators are autonomous in operation, but not independent in consequence. Each neuron fires on its own terms, yet its activity shapes the global state of the brain. Likewise, each conscious life unfolds from its own perspective, with no awareness of the vessel as a whole, yet its experiential output feeds into something larger than itself. The separation is experiential, not structural. TRC therefore reframes consciousness as participation rather than possession. To be conscious is not to own a private mind sealed off from reality, but to act as a generative node through which the larger system explores states, tests configurations, and evolves coherence. We are not observers standing outside the process. We are the process, locally expressed, contributing to a mind vast enough that we can only ever experience it from the inside.